Judge Grayson thought he was sentencing another clueless teen, until the defendant began dismantling the case like a seasoned lawyer. The air inside the Los Angeles County Courthouse felt thick, almost suffocating. Rows of spectators filled the gallery, murmuring as they watched the scene unfold. The defendant's table looked too big for the young man standing beside it, hands in his pockets, chin lifted just enough to show he wasn't afraid. Jalen Dawson, 19. Accused of grand theft auto and resisting arrest. The charges were serious, but the look Judge Walter Grayson gave him made it clear the real trial wasn't about the law, it was about perception. Grayson leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming lazily against the polished wood of his bench. He peered down at Jalen over the rim of his glasses, lips twisting into something between a smirk and a sneer. "You think you're some kind of legal expert?" His voice carried dry amusement. "This isn't a debate club, kid." A few chuckles rippled through the courtroom, the bailiff, the stenographer, even the prosecutor. They were all in on the joke. Jalen didn't flinch. He wasn't laughing. He had spent years preparing for this moment, not this exact one, but close enough. He'd never planned to stand here as a defendant, but he knew the courtroom like the back of his hand. While other kids memorized basketball stats, Jalen memorized case law. While his friends played video games, he played mock trials in his head, arguing imaginary cases before invisible juries. His mother, Denise Dawson, a paralegal for over 20 years, filled their apartment with stories about prosecutors cutting corners, judges playing favorites, and defense attorneys phoning it in. Jalen absorbed every word. By 14, he could break down a trial better than most first-year law students. But none of that mattered to Judge Grayson. To him, Jalen was just another kid in trouble. "Let's make this quick," the judge sighed, flipping open the case file. "I've got a golf game at 2. The audience chuckled again. But this time, something shifted. Jalen's lips curled into the faintest, almost imperceptible smirk, because Judge Grayson had just made his first mistake. The courtroom hadn't noticed. Yet. The prosecutor, Mitchell Carrington, rose with the easy confidence of a man who'd already won. His suit was crisp, his tie perfectly knotted, his tone rehearsed from years of repetition. "Your Honor," he began, "the state will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant, Jalen Dawson, was caught red-handed in a stolen vehicle, a 2022 Audi A6 reported missing just hours before his arrest." He paced in front of the jury box, his shoes clicking sharply against the floor. Officers pursued the suspect through downtown Los Angeles, where he attempted to flee before being apprehended. His fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. The evidence speaks for itself. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. To anyone listening, it sounded damning: a stolen car, a chase, an arrest. Open and shut. Judge Grayson glanced at Jalen over the rim of his glasses, then turned back to Carrington. "Go on." Carrington nodded, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "The defense may try to convince you this was all a misunderstanding, that Mr. Dawson is some unfortunate victim of circumstance." He turned toward Jalen, locking eyes for the first time. "But let's be honest, what kind of victim runs from the police?" The tension in the room thickened like smoke. Grayson leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand, studying Jalen as though already drafting the verdict in his mind. Jalen didn't blink. Carrington flipped through his papers with a crisp snap. "Your Honor, I have here the testimony of Officer Daniel Ruiz, who personally witnessed the defendant behind the wheel before attempting to flee. The vehicle was confirmed stolen. The arrest was made by the book." Grayson exhaled through his nose, unimpressed but satisfied. "Sounds straightforward to me." For most people in that courtroom, it was. But Jalen wasn't most people. He straightened, eyes cold, focused, ready. Because what everyone else missed, the rushed timeline, the sloppy police report, the judge's offhand comment, was exactly where the truth began to unravel. And Jalen Dawson was about to prove it. It probably did. The case was clear-cut: a stolen car, a chase, an arrest. But Jalen Dawson had spent too many years studying trials not to see the cracks forming beneath the surface. Still, he stayed silent, watching, waiting. Judge Grayson tapped his gavel lightly. "All right," he said. "Let's hear the defense's response." He turned toward Jalen's lawyer, Lisa Thornton, a public defender who had barely spoken 3 words since entering the courtroom. She stood, shifting nervously. "Your Honor, my client." Jalen placed a hand on her arm. A silent request. She hesitated, then slowly sat back down. And for the first time, Jalen spoke. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor." The room went completely still. Grayson stared at him, eyebrows raised, mouth curling into something between disbelief and amusement. "You'll what?" Jalen's voice was calm, steady. "I'll be defending myself." A murmur spread through the courtroom like a gust of wind. The bailiff's eyebrows shot up. Carrington's smirk faltered, just for a second, before returning with a sharp laugh. This should be interesting. But no one was laughing when Jalen took his first step forward, because something in the air shifted. The courtroom felt heavier, tighter, as though everyone could sense that everything was about to change. Jalen adjusted his stance, hands still in his pockets. He let the silence stretch, just long enough to make them uncomfortable. Then he spoke. "Your Honor, before I begin, I'd like to confirm something with the prosecution." Carrington crossed his arms, eyebrow raised. "Go ahead." Jalen took a slow, deliberate step forward. "You said Officer Daniel Ruiz personally saw me behind the wheel before I was arrested, correct?" Carrington exhaled sharply, already sounding bored. "That's right. And that testimony is written in his report." "Of course it is," Jalen said evenly. Then he turned toward Judge Grayson. "Your Honor, I move to dismiss that testimony as evidence." Grayson squinted down at him. "On what grounds?" Jalen finally pulled his hands from his pockets, gesturing toward the prosecution's table. "Because Officer Ruiz never saw me in that car. In fact, he wasn't even on duty when the chase began." A flicker of confusion crossed Carrington's face. "What are you talking about?" Jalen took another step forward. "Your Honor, if the court allows, I'd like to submit a request to verify Officer Ruiz's GPS logs from that night. If his report claims he witnessed me in the vehicle, his location data should match that statement." He paused, letting the silence hang for a beat. "But I have a feeling it won't." The gallery erupted in whispers. Grayson frowned, glancing toward the prosecutor. "Counselor?" he asked. Carrington cleared his throat, jaw tightening. "That report was filed by an officer of the law, Your Honor. Are we really going to take the word of a defendant over a trained professional?" Jalen gave a small, casual shrug. "If the officer was where he claimed to be, the GPS data will prove it. But if he wasn't," he let the sentence trail off, unfinished but heavy. Grayson studied him for a long moment before turning to Carrington. "Does the prosecution have any issue with verifying the officer's GPS logs?" Carrington hesitated. The pause was brief, but long enough. The jury noticed. The gallery noticed. And most importantly, Judge Grayson noticed. Jalen took a quiet breath. He'd watched countless trials, studied prosecutors, memorized their tactics. He knew how they worked, their rhythm, their tells, their moments of panic. And one thing was certain, if Carrington truly believed in his case, he wouldn't be stalling. Grayson sighed, rubbing his temple. "Counselor." Carrington finally shook his head. "No objections, Your Honor." But the shift had already begun. For the first time, the courtroom wasn't laughing anymore. It was silent, but the tension was deafening. Carrington shuffled his papers, his polished confidence cracking at the edges. "Your Honor, while we wait for the GPS records, the fact remains that the defendant's fingerprints were found on the steering wheel of the stolen vehicle." Jalen gave a small nod, expression unreadable. "That's true." He took another step forward. "But let's talk about that evidence for a second." Grayson raised an eyebrow, and the entire courtroom leaned in. Judge Grayson gestured for him to continue. Jalen turned to the jury, making deliberate eye contact with each of them. "The prosecution wants you to believe that because my fingerprints were found in a car, I must have stolen it. That's the story they're selling." He paused, letting the silence settle before continuing in a calm, controlled tone. "But let's think about this logically." He took a breath. "Say you walk into a department store and try on a jacket. You put your hands in the pockets, maybe zip it up, then put it back and walk out. A few hours later, someone shoplifts that same jacket. Would the fact that your fingerprints are on it mean you stole it?" A few jurors exchanged uneasy glances. Someone in the gallery muttered under their breath. Jalen didn't give them time to recover. The car in question was parked outside a 7-Eleven hours before the alleged theft. "I was inside that store with 3 friends. And yes, when we walked past the car, I leaned against it. I even opened the door because it was already unlocked. I didn't think much of it. I didn't take the car, didn't drive it, didn't steal anything from inside. Just a dumb moment of curiosity." He let that hang for a second. Then, in a voice sharp enough to cut through the quiet, he asked, "Does touching something make you a criminal?" Carrington cleared his throat, flipping through his notes, searching for something, anything, to regain control. But Jalen wasn't finished. And while we're on the topic, he continued, turning toward the bench, let's talk about how that fingerprint analysis was done. He faced Judge Grayson directly. Your Honor, was the forensic specialist from this case subpoenaed to testify? Grayson blinked, caught off guard by the question. His gaze shifted to the prosecutor. Carrington hesitated, then finally admitted, no. Jalen pressed his lips together, nodding slowly. So let me get this straight. The state is using forensic evidence to try to convict me, but they didn't think it was necessary to bring in the actual specialist who processed that evidence? No chance for me to cross-examine, to ask about the chain of custody, or challenge the accuracy of the analysis. Carrington's jaw tightened. Jalen gave a small, thoughtful nod, as if the answer confirmed what he already knew. Interesting. Judge Grayson sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. It was the look of a man realizing this case wasn't the easy win he'd assumed it would be. But Jalen wasn't done. Not yet. Because what he was about to say next would change everything. He took a slow step forward, voice steady but firm. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence an official statement from the owner of the vehicle. Grayson frowned. The owner? Jalen nodded. Yes, sir. Mr. Raymond Whitaker, the registered owner of the stolen Audi. He provided a statement to police that, for some reason, was never submitted in the prosecution's filings. He turned to face Carrington, eyes narrowing just slightly. And I think I know why. Mr. Carrington, do you recall what Mr. Whitaker told officers the night his car was reported stolen? Carrington's jaw clenched. He knew exactly what was coming. Jalen didn't wait for an answer. Instead, he pulled a printed transcript from his file and read aloud, his voice unwavering. I left my car running when I ran inside the gas station. Some kid must have jumped in and taken off, but it wasn't the guy you arrested. I saw the kid, and he was white. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Jalen held up the paper. That's from the original police report, the same report the prosecution conveniently never mentioned. He turned back to Judge Grayson. The arresting officer omitted this from his testimony. The prosecution ignored it. And yet they want this jury to believe that I, someone who doesn't even match the description of the real thief, is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Carrington stepped forward, scrambling for control. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The defendant was caught in possession of the vehicle. But Jalen shook his head. No, I wasn't. His voice didn't rise, but it sliced through the air with precision. I was arrested blocks away from where the vehicle was abandoned. The silence that followed was absolute. The jury leaned forward. The gallery stopped breathing. And for the first time that day, Judge Grayson looked at Jalen Dawson not as a defendant, but as someone who might actually be right. Walking home after getting snacks with my friends, Jalen said evenly. I wasn't in the car. I wasn't near the car. I wasn't running from anything. The only thing tying me to this case is bad police work and assumptions. Judge Grayson let out a slow breath, rubbing his temple. The case was unraveling fast, and everyone in that courtroom could feel it. Jalen turned back to the jury. The real suspect got away that night. The officers found a black kid in the same general area and decided that was close enough. Silence. The words hung heavy in the air, undeniable and raw. Grayson cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. Does the prosecution have anything further? Carrington was stiff, his face flushed. No, Your Honor. Grayson exhaled and looked at Jalen for a long, unreadable moment. Then he glanced at the jury, back at the defendant, and finally leaned forward. His voice, when it came, was quieter than anyone expected. Case dismissed. A beat of stunned silence. Then chaos. Half the courtroom erupted, some in disbelief, others in quiet relief. The gallery stirred with noise. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Jalen didn't move. Not yet. He let the moment settle, let the reality of it all sink in. He'd done it. Judge Grayson still gripped his gavel, his knuckles white. He looked at Jalen with an expression that was suddenly human. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, recognition. Maybe even regret. Jalen met his gaze, nodded once, then turned to leave. But just as he reached the door, the judge spoke again. Mr. Dawson. Jalen stopped but didn't turn. Grayson hesitated, searching for the right words. Finally he said, "You should consider law school." Jalen smirked. He didn't need to consider it. He was already on his way. Outside the courthouse, the air was thick with noise. Reporters crowded the steps, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Jalen. Did you know the judge would dismiss the case? What are you going to do next? How does it feel to outmaneuver a seasoned prosecutor? Jalen pulled his hoodie over his head, ignoring the barrage. He wasn't interested in the spectacle. This wasn't about proving how smart he was. It was about something bigger. At the bottom of the courthouse steps, his mother was waiting. Denise Dawson, steady, sharp-eyed, the woman who had taught him everything about justice before he ever studied it. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she just looked at him. Then she exhaled, shaking her head. "Boy, you scared me half to death." Jalen chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. "Had to take a risk, Ma." She stared at him another moment, then pulled him into a tight hug. "You always were the stubborn one." The cameras kept flashing, the crowd pressing in, but Jalen wasn't paying attention to any of it. Across the street, leaning beside a black sedan, Judge Grayson stood watching. His posture was different now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something quieter, reflection. He hadn't expected this case to be anything more than routine. Just another day. Another defendant. Another guilty plea. But now, he knew he'd remember this one. Because Jalen Dawson had done something most people never could. He'd made the system look at itself, and for once, it blinked first. And as Grayson turned to leave, that thought lingered like a weight he couldn't shake. Here's the lesson, Jalen thought as he looked back at the courthouse. How many other cases had gone this way? How many people had been convicted not because of evidence, but because of bias, shortcuts, and a system that cared more about closing cases than finding the truth? He had the knowledge to fight back. But what about the ones who didn't? This wasn't just about one case. It was about all of them. He knew what he had to do next. This courtroom wouldn't be the last one he stood in, but next time, he wouldn't be the defendant. He'd be the attorney. And when that day came, he wouldn't be the only one. If this story made you think, even for a second, then share it. The justice system is built on laws, but it's run by people. And people can change. But only if we make them. Hit that like button, subscribe for more stories that matter. And keep the conversation going. Because next time, it might not be Jalen. It might be someone you know.